G'day everyone, welcome to my review of my 2018 CRF450L. Now, a couple of you guys have been asking now for a bit of an overview of what I reckon of the bike now that I've done near on about 15,000 Ks on it. Most of that's been a mixture of like sort of dual sport and adventure riding. Done a few short trips on it, like, ride it to work every now and then, which is all road. I've done a few big trips on it now, big adventure rides. We did South Australia back in 2023. We did Tassie for a week, sort of last year, and then we went up to Coffs Harbour this year, which was a good trip. And in and amongst that, we've done a fair bit of riding around the Vic High Country and doing some rides without any gear on it at all, just sort of day loops through Dargo and around the Bright area. So yeah, now that I've got sort of a decent feel for the bike, it's probably not a bad opportunity now to do a little bit of a review and let you know what I think of it, and some things that I've changed and things that I want to change moving forward, as well as what I think of maybe some of the other bikes that are available in the segment. So we'll start off, I bought the bike in 2022, around September, and basically I bought it for our Simpson Desert trip for our South Australian adventure. My video series is up on YouTube, so you can watch that. There's a few different parts there. So that was the main reason why I bought it, coming from like mainly a road bike sort of background. This is my first road registered dirt bike that I've owned. For the most part, it's been pretty well faultless. I can't really complain about the performance, the reliability of it, and just the way it sort of handles itself, loaded and unloaded. It's been a really sort of solid platform for the type of riding that I do. So maintenance wise, chain, sprockets, I run 1451, so one up on the front and stock rear, with the DID ERVT chain, which is what's recommended for this bike. Now, going up on the front was definitely helped out on the highway a lot, just drop those RPMs a little bit. I kind of do find myself between gearing a little bit. I would like to have the 13-tooth front with a lot of off-road riding. I feel like first gear is still pretty tall, and a lot of the riding, especially in the Vic High Country, I'd like to have a bit more of a lower first gear. But the compromise is that it'll cruise on the highway at sort of 110 all day without any major problems. So I'm happy to sort of make that sacrifice there, and I think it's a good gearing between. You can still do your off-road stuff and you can still cruise on the highway without any issues. So that for me is worth it for sure. If I was only doing short stints from a couple of Ks from my house or whatever to get into a trail road, or if I was trailering the bike to somewhere I wanted to ride it, I think I'd probably even go down to a 12 on the front just to get that lower gearing, so you can sort of use third and fourth a bit more. I find myself using first and second a lot of the time, and on those steep hill climbs, you're in first gear most of the time. So that's the gearing I run. I've put the bigger tank on it. That's been really good. You sort of do struggle to use the last couple of litres of that if you're just due to where the fuel pump is. It's a Nomad tank. They're made about an hour and a half from where I live, so a local Australian made brand, so I like to support that. And it's more than enough range for me. I can easily get 300 kilometres of riding, maybe a bit less when you're sort of in really, really deep sand. But in the Simpson Desert, without thrashing the bike too hard and riding sort of conservatively, that's where you're going to get the most fuel economy. I think I sort of averaged less than 6 litres per 100 through the Simpson, and the same on the highway. And that's taking it pretty easy. I don't ride it, I don't thrash it that hard. I just try and extend the life of the bike, and sort of, when you're in the Simpson and when you're that remote and there's no fuel for, hundreds of kilometres, you sort of want to make sure you get to where you're going. So yeah, I can't complain about the fuel usage. I think it's pretty well spot on for what you would expect for a dual sport like this. Now, in terms of other servicing, I do service it every 1,000 kilometres. I have stretched it out a couple of times. I think the longest I've gone is about 1,800 Ks without a change, and that was only one time when I was in Tassie. We did more kilometres than I expected to. I probably could have changed it, but towards the end of the trip, I was sort of doing easier sort of riding, so I didn't really worry too much. But if you averaged out all the oil changes that I've done and the kilometres and stuff, it works out to be under 1,000 kilometres between changes. You know, if I'm going away for the weekend to Vic High Country or something like that, I just change it when I get back. You know, I might only do 500 Ks or whatever, and I just dump the oil and put fresh stuff in it. It's just easy. So that way when I get back on the bike to go again, it's ready to go and I don't have to think about it. Valve clearances. Now, the valve checks, I do them every 3,000 Ks is the recommended interval. I did them at 3,000. I did them at 9,000. I skipped the 6,000 kilometre one because I was on the South Australia trip. And I did it at 12,000 as well, and I'm about to do it again now that I'm sort of at 15,000 Ks. So far, all the checks that I've done, the valves have been spot on in spec, so I haven't had to adjust them. And you know, can't say much more about that. They haven't moved at all. You know, they're still where they're meant to be, and I'm not expecting to have to adjust them when I do the check this time around. So now, a couple of other things about it. I do run a stiffer rear spring just because of the luggage, and I sort of set the sag to about that 105 mil, depending whatever's in the book. I try and get it as close to that as I can. I have been running a lowering link in the rear. I've since actually just raised it back up to normal height, and when I did run the lowering link, I actually slipped the forks up in the tubes by about 10 mil, and that sort of balanced it out a little bit. When I first put the link in, I kept the forks stock, and it really raked it out, and it was really nice on the road, but it really didn't turn that good, and it really made the front end really sketchy, and I'm still working through the front end, getting it to a point where I actually like the feel of it, because at the moment I don't really have much faith in it. Now, with regard to the front end, these bikes come sprung really stiff in the front, and I don't know about the valving. I've heard on the forums that it's the same valving as the 450R, and maybe the springs are a little bit softer than the R, but I don't really know. But what I do know is that it's really stiff, and I think I am going to try and put some softer springs in the forks based off the calculators that I've done online. The Racetech one sort of suggests that I should go a bit lighter, even with the big tank on it. And the gear, it still is a really stiff front end. It feels good in the sand, and it feels good when you're going fast through whoops and stuff like that. But I don't come anywhere close to using the full stroke. And you know, if anything, I'll probably only use half of it, if that. So that in my head tells me that the front end's probably a little bit too stiff. And you know, it probably doesn't help with that front tracking problem that I've got. I do find that on the loose gravel roads, on tight turns and stuff like that, I do wash the front end out a lot. And some of that's probably down to the D606 as well, which I don't think is a great front tyre. Sure, you get really good wear life out of it, and it'll do everything you want it to, but I just don't think it's the most confidence-inspiring front tyre. So if you've got any suggestions of what I should run on the front, let me know. I'm all ears. Sorry, there's a bit of traffic outside, so if that's what you hear in the background there. Other things I've done to the bike mods-wise. So as I said before, stiffer rear spring. I had the lowering link. I've since put it back to normal. It's an adjustable link, so it's still in there, but it's at standard height. And I run a Get ECU, RX1 ECU with the Wi-Fi module. I did have the traction control switch, and I've got the map switch. Currently though, I just wasn't using the traction control switch, and I rubbed the wire rubbed through, and it wasn't working, so I just removed it. I don't think I'm going to reinstall it. I just don't think I need it. And obviously, the full Yoshi, and that's sort of about it engine-wise. Oh, and the USA intake lid, which is obviously a lot bigger than the Australian one. When I bought the bike, it was just the standard 25 horsepower restricted version. I think we get them in Australia and Europe, mainly get them. So the USA bikes already have the unrestricted lid, and they have a different ECU. I do have a standard USA ECU, and I've got the standard Australian one, and I've got the GET. So I've sort of tested all three of them, and the standard USA ECU is a huge step up in power, but you still get those flame outs and rideability issues with the jerky throttle and all that sort of stuff. I didn't really like it. That's why I went with the GET ECU. We were riding in Vic High Country, and I was absolutely wrecked after a day of just constantly trying to modulate the throttle and deal with the jerkiness while trail riding. And after that day, I said, right, I don't care how much it costs, I have to fix this ECU problem. It's just driving me insane. So yeah, I ordered the GET ECU from Takamoto in the US, and yeah, it's been great. Can't fault it at all. I originally got the GET ECU tuned for the stock exhaust, so when I did the Simpson trip or the South Australia trip, I had the standard exhaust on there with the GET ECU, and just given how much heat comes out of this engine, which is another probably, I don't know if it's a negative, but it's just something you might not be aware of if you haven't ridden one before, but these engines in these bikes this would have to be the hottest engine I've ever ridden on a motorbike before. The heat that comes out of the exhaust and the heat that comes out, like radiant heat from the engine is just unbelievable. It's just so hot. It runs hot all the time. It doesn't overheat, but yeah, I've overheated it once, which was on Goulds track in the sand, and I cooked the clutch and all that sort of stuff, but that's not the bike's fault. That's probably my fault for taking it there fully loaded in deep sand and just revving its neck all day. But once it cooled down, it was good as gold. So yeah, the main reason I got the exhaust was not for the performance. I don't need any more power. I thought that the power of the bike with the aftermarket, with the GET ECU and the stock pipe was more than enough. And I don't really care about the sound, although it does sound a lot better, and it's got that nice throatiness to it. I only got the exhaust to get rid of the catalytic converter and just to have that free-flowing exhaust, so it didn't radiate so much heat. I did end up melting the plastics in my bags a couple of times on the exhaust. Again, it's probably more user error than the bike's fault, but I will say that it's so hot compared to like my mate's DRZ and stuff like that. They seem to run a bit cooler, but this thing will just melt anything. You can see on my exhaust there, I've got 2 heat shields on it just to try and space everything out. And on my latest trip, we were doing some sand riding along the beach in Coffs Harbour, and I melted the plastics again and melted my bags again, just from where my boot was pressed up against the rear plastic. It just melted straight through. Other mods I've done is just the low seat and the Skaggs rear rack. I think that's been really good for what I use it for at the moment anyway. Obviously I've got the Adventure double take mirrors, and I think the stock mirrors are the worst mirrors I've ever had on any dirt bike. And I think if you've got one of these and you're going to ride it off road and you're going to drop it, and particularly if you're riding tracks with trees that overgrow and you're in like the wheel path, the trees just smash the mirrors straight away, and there's not much adjustment in them. And what ended up happening with me was the mirrors got loose, and I kept riding, and the vibrations, the mirror just wiggled in the threads and just completely flogged the threads out. So I've had to helicoil each of them to fit these new mirrors. And these are great. You can drop it and they just bend out of the way and they don't break. And I'm really happy with it. I think they're a great idea, and I think everyone who rides their bike off-road and needs mirrors, best just to take them off, to be fair. But if you need to have them like we do here in Australia, I would highly recommend those. The other thing I will mention for this bike is when it comes from the factory, they don't put any grease if any at all. They put a tiny little bit in the headstand bearings and in your swing arm bearings and all that sort of stuff. They don't come with a lot of grease in there. So if you've just picked one up or you're going to buy one new, make sure you pull it all apart and re-grease the bearings. Now, after the South Australian trip, I didn't do it when I got the bike, and after the South Australian trip, the headstand bearings were completely shot and I had really notchy steering, and so I had to replace those when I got back, and I just packed everything full of grease. The swing arm bearings and stuff were okay, so I just re-greased those, and I'm still running them to this day. But you know, I've got a big trip coming up at the end of this year, and I think I'm going to put all new bearings through everything again just to start fresh, because we will be covering, you know, about 10,000 kilometres on this new trip coming up. So just peace of mind, I'll have all fresh bearings in the wheels and the swing arm. The headstand ones will be fine. I'm not going to touch those again, but I will inspect them. But I'm not planning on having to change them at this point. So far, like I said, I haven't had any major dramas with the bike. In fact, I haven't had any dramas with it, apart from just learning its idiosyncrasies and you know, adapting my gear and stuff specific for this bike. But that wouldn't matter if you bought a DR650 or if you bought a DRZ or a KTM 500 EXC or any of the bikes in this segment. You're going to have to tailor your gear setup and all that sort of stuff, you know, your fueling and all that carby settings or whatever you want to do to the bike. You're going to have to get to know it and build it to suit what you want it to do and what you want to get out of it. I don't think there's any bike on the market that you could just buy and then, you know, take fucking across Australia. You know what I mean? I think regardless of what you buy, you're going to have to do some work to it. So keep that in mind. There's no perfect unicorn, and I like to think of it as on a scale of where you would like to struggle. You know, if you have a full on-road bike and a full off-road bike, where do you want to sit? Do you want to be really comfortable on the highway kilometres and sort of struggle a little bit more off-road? Probably not the right word. It's probably just, you know, where do you want to pick your battle, I suppose. You know, if you've got a really heavy, big adventure bike and you want to take it through the Simpson Desert, sure, you can do it. There's heaps of riders that have taken Teneres and 890 Adventures and GSs and stuff through the desert, but if you drop that, it's going to be, you know, it's hard work. You know, it's hard work when you're doing a big trip, self-supported. And I wanted the dirt performance over the road performance. I thought I could tolerate being uncomfortable on the road, because riding on the road isn't necessarily that hard. Being a road rider, initially, it's just another road ride. And for me, all my road riding is just basically long kilometres to where I need to go. Although I will say this thing hooks it in the twisties, even with the knobbies on. I don't know, I think it rides great on the road for a dirt bike. You know, it's nice and smooth. It's not too vibey for a single cylinder, which is kind of surprising actually. It's really quite refined, the way this thing gets up and runs on the road. So yeah, something to sort of keep in mind there at least. Why did I buy this instead of something like a DR or a DRZ? Like when I say DR, I mean DR650 or a DRZ. I think for me, it just came down to the price and the modern technology that comes with this. So this was actually a few grand cheaper than a brand new DRZ at the time I bought it. And you know, once I added the ECU and the tank and all that sort of stuff, sure, it was more expensive, but with the DRZ I would have had to do those things anyway. Maybe not a carby or anything, but definitely would have had to get a big tank and spring and all that sort of stuff. So it kind of all balances out. But I just couldn't pay 12 grand for a 20-year-old bike, and that's basically it. I would have been, regardless of what is here, I would have been happy if it was, you know, I still would have done all the trips if I bought a DRZ or a DR650 or KTM or whatever. I think when you're on a trip, the bike you're on really doesn't matter, as long as you know how to maintain it, you know how to service it, you know how to fix it if something goes wrong, and regardless of what you've got, if you just get out there and ride it, you're not going to be thinking at the end of the day, oh geez, I wish I had this or that. The experience of the trip, far outweighs the bike you're on, and as long as you like what you're riding, that's all that matters. If you have got an old, 250 air-cooled whatever, and you're riding that, and people have got these new modern bikes and stuff, if you're out there doing the same thing, and if you like riding it, that should just be what you choose to do. You'll put up with the idiosyncrasies of each bike, as long as that's something that you want to ride. And I think that's important. I think, you can read all the reviews in the world, and if something, everyone's saying, no, don't buy that, say for example, you really want a KTM 500, you want to ride it, around Australia or around the world, people say, oh, you can't do it, get something else. Mate, if you want to ride it, just do it. There's plenty of people that have done it before, there's people riding around the world on these. Don't know if I'd do it on this bike, but it's more than capable of doing it. And yeah, so that's all I'll say about that. Enjoy what you ride and just get stuck into it. So all the mods that I've done to the bike, from front to back. So bark busters, mirrors, the big tank, the exhaust, the get ECU, the lowered seat, the Skaggs rear rack. I've got a tail tidy on there. I've got the slightly stiffer rear shock spring and the lowering link. Now, that's about it. I think moving forward, the mods that I will do moving forward before I do Cape York will be some slightly softer springs in the front, and just sort of see how that goes. And to be fair, that's probably about it. I do have a USB charger so I can charge my phone and cameras and all that sort of gear out of the tank bag, and I think that's well worth having. And that was just from the factory plug. There's a factory plug down in here. You can just plug in I cut it off and put a Deutsch connector on there to a USB, 12 volts, and that's it. That's all I run on here. Actually, the other electrical mod I did is I put a Motopressor I've got a Motopressor air compressor that I use to pump the tyres back up, and I've just got the wire wired to the battery, like the power source, and I have the plug tucked up under the plastics. So when I want to pump up my tyres, I just pull the plug out, plug it in, and away you go. I can pump the tyres up again. And I'd recommend one of those if you're doing this sort of adventure riding, so you can get your pressures right. You don't have to be afraid of lowering your pressures too much, because you just pump them back up again, and that's worked out really well. Problems that I've had: the exhaust gets hot. I've mentioned that. So the Nomad tank, it just seems to have a lot of weight in it that vibrates around. And after the South Australian trip, I actually broke the two rear tank mounts. They just completely snapped, and I lost the bolt out the top. So I finished the trip with just the tank sitting there. It wasn't actually bolted on. The guys at Nomad were really good. I sent them an email saying that I'd snapped the tank mounts on the trip, and they sent me 2 new ones free of charge, and I've installed them, and ever since I have had no issues with it whatsoever. I replaced the screws, the bolts that hold it down, with just M6 hex heads from Bunnings, and they've been really good. I Loctite them before when I take them out and put them back in. I just make sure I Loctite them in there so they don't vibrate loose. But I actually, before I do any sort of big trip, I Loctite everything anyway. But yeah, I'll do a bit of a gear and a bike prep video as well for you guys if you're interested. The best mods that I've done are definitely the ECU, and I would say the exhaust, just because it just extracts so much more heat than the standard one does. there's nothing really wrong with the standard one if you can make it work. If you're not running with a heap of bags and stuff like that, I wouldn't be worried about having to rush to upgrade your exhaust. I mean, I sort of did it out of necessity that I needed to have something that wasn't going to get so hot and just melt whatever I put on the back of the bike. I was going to go into a bit of gear stuff, but I might save that for another video, just of how I set it up and the changes I've made to avoid some of that stuff. I'll try and keep this specifically on the bike. But yeah, if you've got any other questions or anything like that, let me know in the comments. But I will sort of just finish off by saying that this thing, for the 15,000 kilometres I've had it, there's been no major issues. Sure, you've got to spend some money on mods to make it work, as it probably should from the factory, but I don't think it's specifically related to this. I think if you bought a KTM, it would be the same. And we're yet to see the new DRZ or anything like that, but I dare say now that it's EFI, it'll have the same issues that this did with the throttle and the fueling, and EFI dirt bikes just that are registered just have this inherent sort of problem, it seems. And I'm looking forward to putting at least another 10, 15,000 kilometres on this before I even think about getting rid of it. If I was to go into a bike shop today and buy, if I was shopping today for another dual sport bike for this type of riding, I think I would still buy this. I reckon I would still buy it, because the riding that I've done and the riding that I do, I think it just sits in that scale of off-road and on-road. I think it's probably, it splits the difference pretty well. You're probably not going to do single track on it, but for general trail riding and adventure riding and whatnot, and it can hold its own on the road. It doesn't lack any power when it comes to overtaking or anything like that. I feel like it's just a really nice balance, and for that reason I'll be keeping it for a little while longer, until I decide to either get something bigger or smaller or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I don't really have a bad word to say about it. Anyway, if you got any questions, chuck them down in the comments. A little bit different video to what I normally do. But yeah, if you want to see more, or got any suggestions, happy to hear them. And I'll catch you on the next one. Thanks guys, cheers.